If heaven could receive mail, to whom would your love letter to grief be about? Welcome, everyone. I'm Tiffany, your Love Letter to Grief podcast host. If this is your first time here, please hit the follow button. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. Today we have with us Sam Jensen. We connected on TikTok after seeing one of her videos as she shared one of the most intimate stories about losing her child. Sam, good afternoon. First, I'd like to say thank you so much, and it is a complete honor to have you as a guest. I understand how personal and intimate the grief journey is, but my sincere appreciation that you have accepted this invitation in hopes that your grief journey may help another grieving soul. Whenever you're ready, you can start your introduction and share your love letter to grief.
Okay. So first, just a little backstory about what happened. On October 7th, 2022, I was out of town for a wedding with my brother and my 2-month-old daughter, Molly. My 3-year-old daughter, Scarlett, and my 2-year-old son, Henry, stayed at home with my mother, their Mima, while I was out of town for a few days. On Friday, I was on my way home and so excited to see my babies. During the layover, I FaceTimed my mom so I could chat with my kids and see how everyone was doing. My mom asked if she could take the kids for a walk to get ice cream since it was sunny and warm day. So of course I said yes, because we'd done that a million times before and the kids love it. While on FaceTime, Scarlett started crying because she dropped her favorite snow globe and it broke. I comforted her the best I could over the phone. We said, "I love you, see you soon," and we hung up. I went to the gift shop in the airport after getting off the phone and bought her a new snow globe, knowing she'd be so excited to see it when I got home. I boarded my last flight, and I was 2 hours from home, ready to hug my babies. When the plane landed, I turned my phone on and got an emergency alert text message that said, "Heavy emergency vehicle presence on Valley Street, avoid the area," and my heart dropped. Our house is the only one on that street. I immediately tried to call my mom and she didn't answer. She always answers the phone on the first or second ring. So I tried 3 more times and then I called my husband, who was at work. While I was on the phone with my husband, the flight attendant made an announcement that said, "Samantha Jensen, we have to speak with you when you deboard." So with my 2-month-old strapped to my chest, I shoved my way past everyone and got off the plane as quickly as I could. When I got off the plane, there were 2 police officers waiting and I immediately broke down sobbing. They told me they didn't have any information about what happened, but that they needed me to call our local hospital and ask them. So I called the hospital and they told me my son Henry had been hit by a car and was life flighted to a bigger hospital and I needed to get there as quickly as possible. I sat on the floor of the airport screaming and begging God to save my child. The police officers drove me to the hospital and I found the emergency room where my son was. He was in really bad shape. Seeing him on the hospital bed will haunt my memories for the rest of my life. As I stood there sobbing hysterically and praying, I didn't know the details of what happened. I assumed my mom had Scarlett and that they were on their way since the nurse I talked to didn't mention my daughter being at the hospital. When the chaplain came and got me to talk in another room, I was actually relieved because I thought I was finally going to find out what happened. Instead, the chaplain told me that Scarlett and my mom were also hit by the car and Scarlett didn't survive. In that moment, my whole world came crashing down around me. I had just talked to her on FaceTime 2 hours ago. I had a snow globe for her in my purse, and she had a soccer game tomorrow. There was no way she could be dead. She was just a baby. All I remember for the next hour or two after they told me is sitting on the floor of the hospital screaming. I was screaming and crying and begging God for my daughter back. Eventually, I had to pull myself off the floor, tell my husband what happened, and go be with my son, who was in critical condition in the ICU. One of the first things I did when I was able to be coherent for a minute was call my people. I called friends and family and asked everyone to come to the hospital. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My best friends flew in from across the country and drove hours to get to me as quickly as they could. Family dropped everything and came to the hospital. They took my 2-month-old and took care of her because I couldn't do it. They held me while I begged to go be with Scarlett. They sat by Henry's bed 24 hours a day so I could rest and make arrangements for Scarlett. Henry had a fractured spine, a broken clavicle, 6 broken ribs, a broken jaw, a liver laceration, and several more injuries. My mom had several broken bones. By the grace of God, they both healed and were home from the hospital a week later. Henry had to be in a full-body brace for 10 weeks. And later that week, my husband and I would go to the funeral home, paint our daughter's nails, read her a story, and sing to our baby girl as they placed her casket into the flames to be cremated. It's been a little over 2 years since this happened, and I have found my faith in Jesus over those years. I will never forget hearing God talk to me in the hospital. I was in the shower the first night, and I needed to be alone for a bit. At that point, my biggest fear was that Scarlett suffered before she died. I was worried that she was scared and wondering where her mom was. I didn't want to think about her being alone. While I was in the shower crying, I hear God speak to me and say clear as day, she was not alone. I came and got her. From that moment, I have felt such an overwhelming and indescribable peace. I was able to focus on Henry's healing without being consumed with thinking of her last moments. Jesus gave me peace that made no sense, peace that I shouldn't have been able to feel. That peace has carried me through these last 2 years. A few months later, we were at church and Henry saw a picture of Jesus. He looked at me and said, he was with me in the helicopter. He had little owies on his hands and I had a big owie. Jesus was holding both my babies on the worst day of our lives, and for that I will be forever grateful. So now I have my letter to grief. Dear grief, you're the companion I never wanted to meet, but now you're deeply entwined in my soul. I've heard it said that grief is the price we pay for loving deeply, and if that's the case, then I welcome you. To have had a chance to love so deeply that loss hurts this bad is a kind of blessing it took a couple of years to appreciate. A mother's love for her child is not comparable to any other love on this planet, so unfortunately, a mother's grief is also uncomparable. When I heard that my daughter died, the only word I can use to describe that feeling is empty. My heart was violently ripped from my chest, and in a single second, all of my hopes and dreams for the future died. I have learned that grief makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what to say when you talk about your dead child. Most people will ignore another's grief for their own comfort, and I don't fault them for that. To be ignorant to grief is a blessing. Since losing my child, I treasure the chance to sit in another's grief with them. I feel drawn to others who are grieving. Grief is so incredibly isolating, and all I want to do is let people know that they are not truly alone. I believe that grief and love are cut from the same cloth. You can't have grief without love, and grief is just love that has nowhere to go. So grief, I welcome you, because to have loved my Scarlett is the honor of my life.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Every time I talk to someone about grief so far with this podcast, everyone has talked about how God has not just showed up, but actually talked to them during that process. So hearing you say that you felt like she was alone and you just were, hoping that she didn't feel alone, and God talking to you while you're in the shower, how did that play into your faith being strengthened? And just can you kind of walk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah, I was ready to write God off. I was like, there's no way that you could let this happen to my child and still be the good, loving God that I know. But in that moment when I needed peace and I needed just comfort, he showed up and showed me that he still is good and there is still, something to be hopeful for. And him just speaking directly to me when I needed it. He didn't have to do that. God doesn't have to show up, and he's still good even if he doesn't show up. But knowing that he felt my pain and comforted me was just the solidification of my faith. And since then, I've just been on fire for Jesus and ready to share my testimony.
Yeah. How was your faith before losing?
I was a pretty regular churchgoer, but I just showed up on Sundays and listened to the pastor, and that was about the extent of my faith. I believed in God, but I didn't, dive deep into my faith and really explore that any more than just a surface level faith. So this has really deepened my faith a lot.
Yeah. I heard you mention that you're now drawn to people who are also grieving. And I find myself doing the same thing because I'm in a place where I just want to try to find some purpose in the pain that I've been experiencing the last couple of years. So I feel the same way. I feel blessed that people trust me with their stories and people want to share with me. And anytime I'm sitting with someone and just able to just listen to them, because I realize the healing that comes from being able to share your story and being able to talk about your loved one out loud, and how much relief that kind of brings us at some of the darkest moments. Did you have anyone in your immediate circle that had experienced any type of grief that you feel like potentially prepares you for this situation at all, or maybe foreshadow what grief on this level could look like?
Thankfully, no. I'm thankful that no one that I am close to has experienced any loss, anything remotely close to this. Um, it did feel like uncharted waters at first because I didn't have anyone that I could talk to who knew how I was feeling. And that was when I really sought out, community on the internet, and just was looking for people that had gone through something similar because, yeah, my close friends and family, of course, they were there for me and, were doing the best that they could to comfort me. But it's hard when you haven't been through this yourself to just know the magnitude of it. And that was when I really turned to the internet to look for that kind of community.
Yeah. You talk about when you got off the plane and they told you about your son was in an accident and how your mind just immediately, went to the child that you were told that was suffering. And him being you said he was in a body cast for 10 weeks. That must have been some sense of grief as well in a completely different aspect. How was that process of you trying to grieve your child that's gone and also help nurture your child that's in the process of healing?
It was incredibly difficult. It was almost impossible to grieve my child and make arrangements for her and make sure that she was honored in her end of life, and also be focusing on my other child who needed me more than he has ever needed me. And I also had a 2-month-old who needed me. So it was incredibly difficult to spread myself so thin. And I really needed to call on Jesus, and I really needed to call on my friends and family and say, I need help. I can't do this by myself. And there's no way I could have done it by myself at all. I needed the community support. I needed the support from friends and family. And I got that, thankfully. And I was able to focus on my son. And like I said, that peace that came from Jesus was enough to sustain me and enough to really get me through that time and let me know that it's going to be okay. There's going to be another side to this story, and we're going to make it through this, because I was also grieving the loss of my son's childhood, his innocence. I mean, you can't come back from that. You've experienced the most evil type of hatred in this world as a 2-year-old, and you've lost your big sister and you're hurt and you don't know what's going on. And so I was also just grieving the loss of his innocence and trying to navigate his mental health. Does he remember what happened? Does he, is he scared? Is he trying to process everything? And how can I help him do that while also processing my own grief? So it was a lot. It was a lot to take on at one time, but I was thrown into it and didn't really have a choice other than to just do it and do my best. And I'm proud of the decisions that I made at the time with the information that I had and with the mental capacity that I had. And it was hard, but I had to do it. I didn't have a choice.
Right. You mentioned your family and friends being the ones that were able to kind of stand in the gaps with you. And I used to be a wedding planner, and I had this saying I would say to people, but this was about just life events. And I would say, your friends are the people you invite to the party and they show up. Your real friends, they may show up a little bit early and they'll probably stay to the end. Like, they don't make other plans during your special events. They want to make sure they're there in attendance the entire time. But I say your true friends, your family, like the real friends, the true ones, they stay after the party and they help you clean up. And anytime I'm doing an event and I look around at the people that didn't just leave and take their party favor and walk out, they stayed and they help you clean and all those things. And so anytime I think of, I hear someone talk about their love and their support that they received in such a tough time, I think about those are the friends that you look out after a party and say, oh, they're in there cleaning up and, just kind of helping pick up the pieces, because it is such a tough time. That's what we need. And I think I want to just remind people that even though grief is so isolating and we feel like we are alone, it is something we have to navigate alone. Being vulnerable enough to allow people to help you. And I think that's a very valuable lesson, just knowing that there are some good people out there who will step up when you need them. But sometimes, like you say, you didn't have anyone that had ever navigated something like this. So people are kind of sometimes just standing by, afraid of saying the wrong thing, but they want to help. So sometimes just inviting them in and allowing them to kind of sit in the gaps with you. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that you had people that were there for you, because that is very important. So, and I'm sure since then you've probably become, I joke about me being the widow whisperer. Anytime someone in my circle loses a spouse, it's like they say, "Oh, go talk to her. She knows what you're going through." But it's
Yep.
true.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've become like the mother that people come to in, the darkest times. So with that being said, what is the message that you like to share with parents that are trying to navigate such a tough time?
I just want people to know that it will be okay. You feel like you're dying, you feel like you're drowning, you feel like nothing is ever going to be okay again. But one day you're going to wake up, and instead of crying when you talk about your person, you're going to smile when you talk about them. And sometimes that shift is not detectable, it just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you suddenly are feeling a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And then one day you have a really good day, and you're going to look back at yourself in the very beginning of your grief, in the trenches of your grief, and you're going to say, wow, I wish I could tell that person that we're going to be okay. I wish I could just go back and hug myself from 2 years ago and say, we are going to be okay. And that's what I just want to tell people, is that if you're in the very beginning of your grief, it's okay to feel like you're never going to be okay again, but you will be.
I love that. I just connected with someone else on TikTok recently. She made a post, and I think she was 5 hours out, and she was sobbing, and it was one of the most just gut wrenching things that I'd seen. It was so raw. And I commented, I said, whatever you do, do not take down this post. Even if you have to just archive it and make it where only you can view it, do not delete it. Because there are people in the comments, they're like, oh, I can't believe you're, saying this and, being so raw. And the reason I told her, I said, don't delete this video, because it's like you say, you wish you could say this to yourself then. But imagine if you had a recording of what you actually feel like in the very beginning, and then 30 days later or 6 months later, 2 years later, you look back, and it does kind of give you, it's proof of God's faith that you actually have you have grown, you have done some healing. And so for me, I've always wrote things down. I like to just write it down, put a date on it, so I have something to kind of look back on. What was a way that you kind of kept track of like where you were in your journey with grief that you can look back on and see how far you've come?
I really am a talker. I like to share. I like to talk. I like to just be open about everything. So from the beginning, my Facebook page has been like my journal, basically. Mm-hmm. I shared there when it very first happened. I posted updates there about my son. I have just shared and shared and shared, and probably too much. I probably overshared, but that's just the kind of person that I am. And I just really enjoy being able to look back at, the Facebook memories that pop up and say, wow, that's where I was 2 years ago, and this is where I am now. And it's just been a really great platform for me to just share my feelings and talk with other parents. I joined lost mom groups on Facebook, and just being able to, chat with people on there and talk to people who've been through the same thing. It's been really helpful to just kind of shout into the void, throw my thoughts onto Facebook, and be able to look back at them. And that has been really helpful for me. I wasn't ever really good at writing in a journal or like, doing anything like that. I just wanted to share with everybody and have my story be heard from the very beginning.
Yeah, I love that. The Facebook memories are everything. Like even to this, I remember the first year, I would wait till midnight every night. I remember this. I would wait till midnight every night just to click it to see what memories I could see of the, from the year before or whatever. This was before, like not just the grief journey, but just like the love and life journey. So like
Yeah.
those videos that we post and you get to hear the voice. And I always tell people like, don't be afraid to document your life. Like a lot of people are like, oh, y'all post some of you people post so much on social media. But imagine years to come when God decides it's our time to come home and we leave this basically footprint of our life on social media for our kids to look back on. I think that's very important. So I did the same thing. My book actually came from my Facebook post initially. So keep posting, keep sharing. Is your Facebook page public, or if people wanted to connect with you, how could they connect with you on social media?
Probably TikTok is going to be the best way to connect with me, or Instagram. My Instagram is linked on my TikTok. My Facebook is private because I post a lot of pictures of my kids. But if you want to send me a message on Instagram, my Instagram is public. I would love to chat with anyone who wants to, anyone who's been through something similar, anyone who just wants to say hi. I would love to chat with any of you.
Okay. So I always like to tell people, we often ask when we hear somebody passed away, well, what happened? And that's, I think, a natural thing for people to ask. But the question that I like to ask for my podcast is, to me, it's not as important as what happened and how the person passed away, but why was their passing so hard? So if you don't mind, just kind of give us an insight to who Scarlett was and what did we miss out on by not getting a chance to meet her.
Man, she was the happiest little girl I have ever met in my entire life. She was just pure sunshine, and she was so kind and generous. For a 3-year-old, she just blew me away with her kind heart and her empathy for others and her just ability to make anyone happy. If she was in the room, we were smiling and we were laughing and we were having a good time. She was just the light of our family. And she loved horses. She loved unicorns. She loved playing soccer. She loved playing with her friends. She had just started preschool and she loved going to school and going to see her teachers and her friends. And she was just amazing. She loved to garden with me. She knew the names of all the plants in the garden and what we could eat and what she could pick when. And she was so smart. I was going to homeschool her. And I remember the exact instance when I realized that she was way too smart for me to homeschool her was when she came up to me and she told me, bats can see in the dark because they use echolocation. And I said, yes, ma'am, you are right. And I don't know how you learned that, but you are way too smart for me. Um, she just was so pure and innocent and just happy all the time. She never had to experience anything negative in the world. She just got to experience love, and she was love. She just radiated happiness. And yeah, everyone's missing out on not knowing her because she was just the sweetest thing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So I know you talked about how you worry about your son because you feel like he lost his big sister and his play partner. I'm sure like some siblings like your little partner in crime who you get in trouble with. So how is your son with this? It's been 2 years. How is he handling everything?
He has gone to therapy. We've done therapy with him and, tried to make sure that we were doing all the right things and that we were helping him process everything. In the beginning, it was really rough because he just didn't understand why his sister was gone. He just could not comprehend like where she was or why she wasn't coming to play. And it was really, really difficult to explain to him every single time that he asked for her that she's in heaven, she can't come home. And he's like, well, can we go to heaven? And I'm like, no, we can't go there. And he says things like, I'm going to become a butterfly and fly up to heaven and get Sissy and bring her back. And he says things that just break my heart. Yeah. But his love for his sister is so evident when he just wants her back so badly. Even 2 years later, he talks about her every day. we just moved to a new house, and he asked if he could have a picture of Sissy to hang in his room. So we ordered him a canvas of his sister, and we hung it right next to his bed. He likes to talk to her before he goes to sleep. And even though he was so little and isn't going to probably remember her when he gets older, we try to make sure that he does remember her and remember, their adventures together and their good times together. And he's doing okay. He talks about it occasionally, but for the most part, he just misses his sister. And he has 2 other sisters now that he is the big brother to. But I think he just really misses having that older sister figure. He's kind of lost sometimes and is looking for that direction that would have come from his big sister. And it's hard to see him step into the role as the oldest sibling when I know that that's not what he was meant to be. Mm-hmm. He was supposed to have someone to guide him and teach him and show him the ropes, and he was robbed of that. And I think that's harder for me to accept than it is for him to accept. He's fine. He's happy. And, of course he misses her, but he's happy as can be. But I think it's just harder for me as a mom to look at him and say, this wasn't supposed to be how it is. This is not how it was supposed to look. And he does okay with it, but it's harder for me, I think.
Mm-hmm. So your son, did you do any grief counseling yourself, or did your husband do any grief counseling?
Yeah, my husband and I both went to a grief counselor for several months. My husband stopped going after a little while, and I kept going for almost a year. Mm-hmm. Until I felt like we had just talked in circles over everything, and there was nothing new that I could even talk about. And it was incredibly helpful to just sit and talk. I did, I don't remember what it's called, EMDR therapy. I think that's what it's called. And it's like basically for people who have PTSD, just like a way to kind of help with the triggers and help with the trauma and stuff. And that was incredibly helpful for me. So I feel like we did our work, we put in the work and went to a grief counselor. We did the work at home. We worked on ourselves, and we got to a really good place.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I started grief counseling immediately. And it was one of the things I've always said. I feel like it was life-saving for me. Just being able to talk, like you say, you do talk in circles because, every week you go there, you just, okay, like you talk through it. And I went to grief counseling maybe like a year and a half. And then I remember my counselor telling me, if you ever want to come back, you can always start back coming in. And she explained it to me. She was like, there's going to be moments in your life that you're going to need to work through grief again, because it's going to be something that kind of triggers it in a different way. And for me, it definitely made sense this year because my daughter's a senior in high school. And so for the first time since my husband passed away, I find myself needing to kind of rework through things because it's like a completely different stage of life. And the same for her. They mentioned to me my daughter did grief counseling, but as she went through life, there's different stages where just kind of, since her mind is taking in different things, where she was able to go back in and just kind of work her way through it. So, I'm definitely an advocate for people seeking grief counseling, not giving up on if the first counselor isn't a perfect fit, looking again, because sometimes people go and they're like, it doesn't work for me. It may just not be a great fit, but I definitely would encourage people to definitely seek grief counseling, and keep it in your pocket. One of those things that if you need to go back in at any stage, because it's not something you graduate from. So I'm glad that you mentioned that you guys, and it is about doing the work. It's almost like, it's like, I always talk about grief like, okay, here we are. Now what? Like I have to figure out new ways to navigate it because it's not going anywhere. And it's just a part of our lives now. So how is your mom doing? Because she was with your kids during the time. How is she doing?
Yeah. She's doing really well. She moved in with us after the accident because she just wanted to be near her grandbabies every single day. And so I think that has helped a lot, just being able to be close and be with us and experience every moment of their lives has helped her a ton. She also went to grief counseling and had to work through a lot of the guilt that she felt for, being the one that was in charge of them and being responsible for them while I was gone and having this accident happen. Even though my husband and I assure her every single day that we don't blame her and it's not her fault. There's only one person here who's at fault, and it's not her. We make sure that she knows that. And I think she has gotten to a point where she does know that, and she knows that she's loved and her grandkids love her and we love her and we don't blame her, and it will never be her fault. And there's nothing that she could have done differently. It's not like she was doing anything wrong. She took her grandkids for ice cream. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And it was just a normal everyday occurrence. And the only thing that she could have done differently was not go. But we can't just not live our lives and not do anything out of, fear of something bad happening. And so I think she's doing a lot better now, after going through counseling and after just the constant reassurance that we love her, we don't blame her, we don't fault her. It was not anything that she did.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you, because I'm sure there's a lot of parents that when things happen and there's an accident they do blame themselves and they do feel like they're responsible. So I love that you said that, because I'm sure there's someone that's listening that may need to hear that message, that's been holding on to this guilt that they're the reason something happened. But I'm a firm believer that you can be as safe as possible, and it's just out of our control. Like, some of the worst things I've ever heard in life, and you think, how could this even possibly be the way this is someone's last day? But it's like just releasing the guilt of like, oh, it's my fault because I was the person that took care of them, or I was the person that was in charge. So hopefully someone is listening that is able to just let that guilt go and be a little more kind to themselves, because I cannot imagine how tough that has to be, that to hold such a weight. So just speaking about grief a little bit more, what are the dark parts of grief that you feel like you weren't prepared for? Like, looking back at it, what's something that you wish somebody had said, hey, Sam, this is something that you should be prepared for, that's going to be coming up soon with your grief journey?
I think just how isolating it can be. It was really a shock for me, because even though there were other people that were going through this with me, my husband, my mom, my friends, my family, everyone was going through it with me, but I was on my own grief journey personally, and there was nothing that anyone could do to help me along that journey. It was all me. I had to, really look inward and focus on myself and just make sure that I was doing okay. I wasn't prepared to have to do a lot of the work on my own. It was really difficult to just feel like I'm the only one this has ever happened to, and my life is destroyed, and what am I supposed to do about it? I'm helpless. I wish someone would have told me that even though everyone has to go on their own grief journey, you're still not alone. There are still people that love you and care for you and will help you along that journey as best they can. And I just need to be able to tell people what I need. I need to be able to determine what I need, tell people what that is, how they can help me, and really just help them help me. I kind of expected people to just know what to do. I expected people to just help me, make me feel better. And I really needed to look inward and say, okay, this is what I need, and I need it from this person. So I need to communicate that to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really difficult for me to realize that, people don't just intuitively know how to help you. You have to know how to help yourself and then delegate that and, see how other people can help you. So it was just really isolating. And I just really wish that someone would have told me that, you know, it's okay to feel alone, but you're not really alone.
Yeah, I agree. Because in every single person I've talked to so far with this podcast, they have said the exact same thing in a different way, but it is very isolating. But you have to do the work because it's like you can be grieving your child with your husband, and most people think, well, oh, you have your spouse, you're going to go through this together. It's two different. You still have to do it individually. Like you can help one another along the way, but when you're in the shower or driving in your car and you're sitting with those thoughts and grief is surrounding you and trying to drown you, that those are the moments that you're going to have to dig deep within your own self and lean on your faith and find some type of strength to figure it out and keep pushing. So I agree with that. Um, and just speaking of, and I also agree, like I tell people, most of the people around you may never have gone through grief, and they're blessed. Thank God you don't know what to say. Thank God you don't know what to do. And so I do feel like it is our job to educate people in this situation because a lot of us walk around with this disappointment like, oh, I expected people to show up bigger. But if they've never lost a child or they've never lost a parent or a spouse, how do they know how to show up? To them, they may think when they send you that message says, I'm here if you need me, they may think they've done it. And so I do challenge us as those that are grieving to take people up on that. If someone says, let me know how I can help, be fair to those people and give them a chance to step in. And if you know there's something that you need, let them know. If it's something as simple as, I don't have the strength today to even push through. Like, I don't have it in me. Like, I woke up and I just don't have it. Like, it's okay to reach out to people who love and want to be there for you and let them help. Like, if you know for a fact that you haven't had the strength to cook dinner in the last couple of days and you have a friend that is a great cook, text them, say, hey, what's for dinner? Trust me, someone that loves you getting a text saying what's for dinner, they're going to be like, oh my God, yes, I can help. Like, they reached out to me, let me help them, because the people around us feel helpless. And so I
Yeah.
think it's our jobs to work together to get through the grief. And there's a reason why God has placed certain people in our lives to walk this journey with us. And so, were there any things that you can think of that kind of stood out to you? And I know you say your people were driving from near and far, being there with you, sitting with your child as you were trying to make plans and helping you along the way. But are there any just notable things that you wanted to just point out that you really remember?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me over just even the last 2 years, right after it happened and continuing on over the years, is my friends who just let me talk. My friends who just sit and listen and let me talk about my daughter and let me talk about my grief and just don't judge, and they just let me talk. It doesn't make them uncomfortable to hear, about my child. It doesn't make them uncomfortable to hear about my grief. They just sit with me and let me be what I need to be. They let me cry. They let me talk. They let me just sit in silence if I need to. And just physically being there with me while I'm going through this has been the biggest help for me, so that I'm not, you know, physically alone, because that's when the grief hits the hardest. And just having people be around me. I'm a very social person. And so that has been the most helpful for me. Like my husband, for example, didn't want to be around anyone.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to grieve privately, and that's what helped him, was to just kind of be left alone. And so it really depends on the person, but your friends, your family, if they're going to want to be left alone or if they're going to want to sit with you. And that was really helpful. People bringing us meals was incredibly helpful, because I had people at my house. I had friends and family there, and I didn't want to cook for people, and they never would have expected me to anyways. But just having people drop meals off was so helpful. And just everyone that checked in with us and said, I'm here, what do you need? And for me to actually be able to say, we need formula for the baby. Can you grab some and drop it by the house? Because I can't go to the grocery store right now. And people did. Our community did that for us. And everyone showed up in the best way. But the sitting with me while I felt my feelings, the meals being dropped off, the checking in with us, just everyone was so helpful.
Mm-hmm. And we talked briefly about your faith beforehand. My book is called Love Letter to Grief, Learning to Walk by Faith. And I've always felt that I was a very faithful person. I feel like my faith has always been very intact. And I love that you said that when it first happened, you were ready to write God off. And I think that's such an honest thing that a lot of people, it's like we have a fear of speaking the truth on things like that. Because of course, we all want to show the strongest side of us, to people. But it's also okay to be honest, because there's someone out there right now that is in a fight with God, and they are struggling with their faith, and they have not yet come to terms with how something so horrible could happen to them. So, can you just kind of just talk with me more about just, and even like the message that you said about your son, that he was at church and he saw a picture and he told you that Jesus was with him in the plane. If you just kind of want to talk more about your faith and just how that played into it.
Yeah. So the best thing that my pastor told me in the beginning of this, when I was just angry, was it's okay to be angry at God. God can handle it. God can take your anger and he's not going to hold it against you. It's okay to be angry, because I was pissed. I was angry. How could this have happened to my child? How could God let this happen? This is the Almighty God who can save anyone and can perform miracles. Why didn't he save my child? Why wasn't there a miracle for my child? What, were we not deserving of this? Why? And after, hearing God speak to me when I was in the hospital and just getting that peace from him, and then what my son told me about that he saw Jesus in the helicopter with him, and it just made me realize that even though I felt like God had abandoned me and my family, he really hadn't. He was there the whole time. And even though this horrible, tragic thing happened, it wasn't from God. God didn't kill my child. God didn't cause this. God weeps with us. Jesus weeps. He's near to the brokenhearted. He feels our pain. And I had to realize that God didn't want this to happen. It's something that happened because our world is broken and there is evil in our world. And that is not something that we can get away from. And that doesn't mean that it was something that God caused or, did to my child. It's just something horrible that happened. And afterwards, God showed me that he was still with me and he was grieving with me. And, Jesus walked my baby home, and she's in the best place that she can possibly be now. And, it's hard for us here on earth who are left behind, but, she's happy and perfect and running through fields of flowers and living her best life. And so I had to take comfort in knowing that I will see her again one day. And that just my work here on earth is not done. I need to share her story. I need to share my testimony. And I have to praise God through all of this, because he showed up and he stayed with me. He didn't leave me. He didn't leave my family. He healed my son. My son was in critical condition. He was not doing well. He had so many things wrong with him. And now he's a perfectly healthy 4-year-old who runs around and plays, and you would never be able to tell that he was in this horrible accident. And that's God. God healed him. God saved him. And while I am angry that he didn't save my daughter, I can also be thankful that he did save my son and save my mom. And it's okay to be angry, even if your anger is at God, because like I said, God can take it. And my prayer is that eventually, we move out of that stage of anger and move into a stage of praise and thankfulness, and move into a place in our lives where we can see the silver lining, basically, and just see that God was there and never left us and will always be there until we go home.
Yeah. Were there any moments before, because you say you were out of town before the accident, was there anything that happened prior to you leaving that you look back on and kind of feel like it was anything that was odd or anything like that?
So my daughter actually had a dream before I left, and she told me she woke up crying. She was so scared. She had this dream, and she said that someone in a truck was chasing her on a road, which is exactly what happened.
Wow.
And I remember just comforting her, telling her, like, you're safe. There's nothing to be worried about. There's no trucks. There's no road. You're okay. And I didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, she had a bad dream. And then after this happened, I was like, whoa, she basically like had a premonition of what was going to happen to her. And I, I mean, you can't take every dream seriously that happens. It's not like I could have been like, oh, something bad is going to happen because
Right,
she
of
had this
course.
dream. But looking back on it now, it's just kind of crazy that,
Wow.
that happened right before. And other than that, it was just a super normal, like, hug, kiss, goodbye, I'll see you in a few days.
Mhm.
And you never think it's going to be the last time you're going to see your child. So if I knew that, I never would have left, or I would have taken her with me, of course. But it was just a simple, I love you, I'll see you later. And then we FaceTimed every day.
Mhm. Yeah. And the only reason I ask that question is because it just there's these, I don't know, it's like this repetitive occurrence of foreshadowing. And I've never actually talked to people about it, but it's been something, and I don't even know what made me even think that there was anything that you would say that would make this all connect, but that is really interesting. I remember for myself having a conversation with God, and he kept asking me if I trusted him. And I kept thinking, why is he asking me, do I trust him? And I kept saying, yeah. And it's just like he just kept asking me over and over. And I'm like, okay, like what is he trying to do here? Like, I get it. Yes, I trust you. And then of course afterwards, like, oh, that's why you kept asking, do I trust you? Because I was going to really need to, we talk about it. We talk a good game when we're going to church, and reading our scriptures, and, talking about how much we love God. But it's the moments where, like you say, the evils in the worlds collide. And when you are faced with things like this, where you have to do the work and really show, like, okay, I say I'm a faithful person. Now I'm going to have to really allow my test to be my testimony and put the work in. So I definitely can see that. Did you feel, at what point did you make the decision that you were going to be like a grief advocate? And I say grief advocate because your social media, you're very vocal. And I know people are drawn to you because of you sharing your story. And it's almost like grief share. You post something and everybody's in the comments just grief sharing. So what moment made you realize that's where you wanted to be?
I just remember after it happened, I was praying, like, what is the purpose of this? What is the reason behind this? And there has to be something good that comes of this. With the situation, how it happened, it's not like there were, laws to be changed that I could be advocating for, or,
Mm-hmm.
anything like that necessarily that I could be focusing on. And so I just remembered feeling, okay, I feel like I'm the only one that's ever gone through this. I don't want anyone else to ever feel like that again. And so I decided that I was going to open myself up and just kind of crack open my heart and say, this is what it's like. And if you feel the same way, I'm so, so sorry. And I'm here with you. I'm walking this with you. And if you want to talk about it, we can talk. If you don't want to talk, we don't have to. If you want to listen to me, that's great. I'll be the voice. I feel so honored that people feel safe enough to share their grief with me. On my TikTok, the comments of people just sharing their stories is incredible. And I'm so thankful that I was able to create a space that people were able to talk about their people and share their stories and share their grief, because it can be like a taboo subject where people don't want to talk about grief because it makes other people uncomfortable. But I just remember thinking that I don't want anyone else to feel the way that I'm feeling. So I want people to know that it's okay to grieve loudly. You can talk about your grief. You can talk about your person. You don't have to do this by yourself in the dark. You can talk about this if that's what's helpful to you. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to talk about it, absolutely do. You don't have to. But I just wanted to create the space that people could if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because it's like you mentioned, like your husband wasn't the type of person that wanted to be surrounded by people and he didn't want to talk about it. And so I remember myself when I first started grief counseling, my stepson didn't want to go to grief counseling. And initially I was like, no, he needs to go. It's going to help him. And then my grief counselor was telling me, she was like, you have to understand that everyone doesn't need to process the same way. And so I feel like, I love that you said that, because there may be someone that's listening that will probably say, oh, I could never share my story. I could never read my love letter to grief. And I could never talk about it like the way it's been talked about, but they can hear it and they can listen. And so I love that you said that, like, just being a space where the voiceless has a place to kind of be and hear things. And they may not be a talker. They may not be someone that can find the perfect words to put out into the universe to describe how they feel. But my prayer through this podcast is that throughout the next couple of weeks, as guests come on, that we say something to someone who doesn't want to speak out, but they hear it and they can continue to grow and continue to heal in their own grief process. So just speaking of that, if you're talking to a mom or a dad that's lost a child and they're trying to find their space now, and they're even just trying to understand, like, their purpose after, what would you say to that person?
I would say that it's okay if you don't turn this into a purpose also. It's okay to just grieve and live your life and not do anything big and major about it. You don't have to. There shouldn't be any pressure to, in the beginning, I felt pressure like, oh, well, I need to be, starting petitions and, doing something big and, like, making something come of this. And I felt this pressure to just, like, be more than what I was ready to be. I didn't have the mental capacity to be trying to advocate for changing laws and for doing that kind of stuff. And I know a lot of people feel that pressure after something tragic happens. They're like, okay, well, I need to educate people about this topic. And that's great. If that's your calling, if you feel led to do that, then awesome. But I just want people to know that it's okay if you don't do anything great with it. You're allowed to just live your life normally, feel your grief, and just put one foot in front of the other every day. You don't have to make something big and grand out of it.
I love that. And when you said that, it really spoke to me, because that is so real. Like, to someone that's listening, that's thinking that they need to do more, your more is that you're still here. Your big thing that you're doing is that you've decided not to give up. That you've decided to get up in the morning and take a shower, or you decided to just exist and keep going. Like, that's big. And sometimes, like, the smallest things that we can do in our grieving process, like, we have to give ourselves credit for what we're doing. I don't care if it is the smallest, most simple thing. If you were able to go to sleep without taking a Tylenol pen, that's a big thing. if you were able to get through looking at a picture and not being in shambles after, that's big. Like if you were able to realize that today's your baby's birthday and you're still on this side of earth with us and you didn't decide to listen to the ugly side of grief, because that's something else we need to talk about. Grief and the other son, there are sides of it that will try to destroy you if you allow it. And so your big thing could just be the fact that you are trying to find the silver lining, that you are trying to stay positive, and that you are trying to keep going. That's big. Everyone doesn't have to start a podcast. Everybody doesn't have to have a social media following. You don't have to do all that. It may be too hard, and that's okay as well. So I love that you said that, and I hope that there's someone that's listening that's been struggling, and it doesn't mean that you love your person any less. You love your person just as big as we loved our people. Like you say, everyone is not going to start a podcast. Everyone's not going to write a book. Everyone's not going to be changing laws and on 2020, like talking about their story. That's not everyone's story. So I really think what you said is going to be very helpful to someone that's struggling already, and it takes some of the pressure off. Like we need to be kind to ourselves. Like acknowledge the little things, be kind to yourself, and give yourself grace. Like this journey is tough enough. Just learn to give ourselves grace and give one another grace. I think that will take us much, much further. So, speaking of trying to do things in a big way or not in a big way, the holidays are coming up. And I know for some people, this is a really tough time. It's just one of those little reminders that, a time where people are flooded with family and traditions and things. So how do you navigate the holidays, and are there things that you do that try to help you through it?
So I personally still like to include my daughter in the holidays. I know that that's not for everyone, and that is totally fine. You do what feels right to you. For us, we still put her stocking up at Christmas. We still, we put up a pink Christmas tree for her, and we put special ornaments that are just for her on the tree. So she has like her own tree, and it's really sweet and fun. And we like to include her, and that's what feels right to me. And as soon as it stops feeling right to me, then we won't do it. And we just kind of go with the flow of what feels right at that time. We don't like to put pressure on our family to do certain things or uphold certain traditions or, do things out of obligation. We just do what feels right at the time and what makes us feel good. And right now, what makes us feel good is including her. And so that's what we are doing in every way that we possibly can. It's hard around the holidays to know what the right thing to do is. And it's like you feel guilty if you aren't doing the right thing or if you aren't including them, but then sometimes it feels weird to include them. And it's just such a hard thing to navigate and know what the right thing to do is. And so I really just learned that it's okay to change your mind. If I say, oh, I want to put up her stocking this year, and then I go to do it and it doesn't feel right, it's okay to change your mind and say, well, actually, I'm not going to do that this year because it doesn't feel right. So even if you set out to do something to honor your person or to include them or to do something for the holidays and it just doesn't feel right, it's okay to change your mind and do something different. And it's also okay to just move forward and start new traditions and start new things at the holiday season. And you don't have to feel pressured to do anything specific. Just do what feels right.
Yeah. I think the same can be said for anniversaries. I know there's a lot of weight that people put on themselves, like, oh, I would need to do some grand gesture on this anniversary, or I want to release balloons, or I want to light candles or post something or do something in particular. And that's great if you have the strength for it. But I love that you say, give yourself permission to change your mind. You can have this grand idea, and the morning of, you may wake up. And I always tell people, just go based on what you have the mental capacity to do. If you wake up and you had this ideal that one thing was going to happen and your grief battery is at 1%, it's okay. I'm on 1% today. I don't have it. Like I'm very brutally honest. Like, nope, I'm not doing it. I don't have it. I don't have the space for it. So I love that you said that. I think there's going to be healing in that because someone needed to hear that message. It's okay if you have an ideal and you're putting it together. Like, yeah, no, I don't think I want to do that. No judgment. It's okay. And there's a lot of books out there about grief. Trust me, I've done the work. I've looked for them, and there's a lot of books I've read that have been helpful. There's been a lot of messages that I've come across, but there is no book that tells you the perfect way to do it. And so don't be so hard on yourself that you feel like you're doing grief wrong. You look at somebody else, you're like, dang, well, Sam is doing this and Tiffany is doing that. What am I doing wrong? Nothing. Like you're doing the best you can. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. We're all going to make mistakes along the way. Looking back, I'm sure there's things that all of us would have done different at some point. And it's okay as well. Like we just keep trying, we keep showing up, keep doing the work. And so I do want to encourage anyone that's on their grief journey, or even if you're one of the people that God has selected to stand in the gaps of someone else during their grief journey. It's okay every once in a while, you may say something wrong. You know, you may have the best intentions and you may send a text message to your friend and think, oh, this is going to help her. And you may send them spiraling, and that's okay. You know, we're not going to always get it right. We're not always going to say the right thing. You may think, oh, I'm going to send a birthday card to my friend who lost her mother. And then you realize you put the wrong date on it. You know, just give yourself grace. It's okay. We're going to make mistakes. There's no right or wrong way to do this. But all we can do is just keep trying our best. So with that being said, is there anything that you just feel like you want to share that could be helpful to anyone that's on the grief journey?
I just really want to encourage people to be kind to themselves. This is a really difficult journey. No matter who you've lost, everyone is going to know grief at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. And I just really encourage you to be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and don't make it harder for yourself by being tough on yourself. You have to just be gentle and realize when enough is enough for you. Prioritize your own well-being over anyone else's. You don't have to feel pressure to make people comfortable. It's okay to make people uncomfortable. You are allowed to express what you need to express. You can talk about your grief. You can be quiet about your grief. However you need to grieve is the right way for you to grieve. And don't let anyone put any pressure on you to do it a certain way. And just be so kind to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And just to take it a step further, I just want to encourage us to be kind to each other. Because, you know, like imagine the person, like you're on the plane and you're about to get the worst news of your life and you're sitting beside someone that had a rough day that's a complete jerk to you. You never want to be the person that impacts someone in a negative way because you never know what someone's going through. So I want to encourage us to just be kind to each other. You come across people that may work in the service industry and maybe you were expecting something that didn't happen and you kind of react to a certain way. Well, you never know. That person may be at work because they need to be there financially, but they could have just got the worst news of their life. They could be trying to figure out how to financially pay to bury a child. And that may sound harsh, but that is the reality for a lot of people. And so I agree. We need to be kind to each other, and be kind to ourselves. So I think that is a great message. And I know a lot of people that are currently struggling silently about grief. And I look at their eyes and I can just tell that they're really, really struggling. And so I feel like a lot that you said today, there's a couple of people I'm going to send this video to personally, because there's a lot of things that you said that I know can be helpful for them, because it is very, very tough. And a lot of us are struggling, but just give yourself some grace and know that you're doing the best that you can. So I love that. I love everything that you shared. And just in closing, is there anything that you, like I say, you know, if heaven could receive mail and you were to send a sweet message to Scarlett, I'm sure you talk to her all the time. But if you could just pin something to her, just maybe say something to her, what would it be?
We love you. We miss you. We will never, ever, ever stop talking about you, and we will make sure that as many people know your name as possible.
I love that. Well, guys, this episode and all others can be found on our YouTube channel, Love Letter to Grief. I would like to thank everyone for listening. I would like to thank Sam for coming on today and being our guest, sharing your story, and just hearing of the strength that you've been exhibiting, and commending you for pushing through on your journey and continuing to show up in the best way that you can. If there's anyone in your immediate circle that is also interested in penning a love letter to grief or appearing on our podcast, you can contact me directly at lovelettertogrief@gmail.com. But just based on what Sam said today, I also want to just remind people it's okay if you're not one of those people that wants to show up and actually pen a love letter to grief. You may want to do it and just share it with no one but yourself. But however you need to grieve and however you need to walk this journey, we just encourage you to do that and continue to show up for yourself. So, guys, thank you so much for listening to Love Letter to Grief.